Speaker, does $16,000 in pay raises for Portland Public School administrators yield better outcomes for Oregon kids? I would argue no. Does $80,000 a year in catering to the Department of Education buy better outcomes for kids? I don't think it does. When you look at other states that don't require, and we heard that almost all Oregon teachers are required to have a master's degree, does asking teachers to debt service another $30,000 of their education buy better outcomes? Well, in other states that don't require that, who graduate children on some of them less money and less educational requirements for teachers, a bachelor's degree in education, and let people go teach, those states have better outcomes. When we start our education system in this state, historically saying that we're not going to educate Black children and Native American children, and 160 years later, that's the outcomes we have, because a system called teacher tenure allows us to pull weighted dollars out of low-income schools and redirect them inside a school district, and legally that's okay, then we're going to have bad outcomes. So when we start our education system completely flawed, and then we overlay things like PERS and we overlay things like healthcare, and we say that healthcare is part of the total compensation and not just something we'll afford people who teach. And then that can be bargained collectively and driven into the costs, drivers, that's a problem. When 197 school districts in this state get to go out individually, collectively bargain their contracts, and then come back to the legislature and say, we don't have enough money, when 70% of the education dollars that we provide come from this body, and we're supposed to respond to those 197 school districts who, without our knowledge, went out and gave away whatever farm they wanted to give away in their local bargaining, that's a problem. So the structural piece of how we are funding education has real issues. So let's look at other states. Last week, or a week or so ago, Representative Hernandez, Representative Bueller, and Senator Knope and I met with a young man who was the first in his family to graduate from high school, the first in his family to graduate from college. He works at Intel, and he's been in Oregon for a year, and this is his first year as an Oregon citizen, and he loves it. He comes from a historically Black community in Indiana, where in his school, with less education dollars, he was earned not only his high school diploma on time and got his bachelor's degree in 4 years when it takes 6 years in Oregon on average. That young man is now a productive Oregon tax-paying citizen, and he did it with his state school dollars going towards his higher ed, breaking down the lines between K-12 and higher education. And we can say, well, that's another state and that's a student and he didn't come from here. So I want to talk about my student for a moment. We've heard a lot about educators and why we need to keep PERS and teacher stories. Let me tell you about a student story. In my house, we believe in education. I went to 5 elementary schools. I went to 3 middle schools. I did not go to 8th grade. I went to 2 high schools and several colleges, but I finally got an education. So in our house, education matters because it is the way out of poverty. It is the way that lifts kids up and breaks the cycle of poverty. So my son comes to me, my oldest son comes to me in the beginning of his sophomore year, and he says, Mom, I want to drop out of high school. And that would panic a lot of parents, and he was very serious. And so I told him, I said, here's the deal. If you can show me that you do not need to be remediated in our community college system, I will let you drop out of high school. And so he went up to the college, drove himself up there, took the community college entrance exam, and of course, Mom's wise enough to know he's going to need a little remediation. But then of his own accord, he figured it out. He went out and he said, you know what, I'm going to do this. So yesterday was his first day of community college course.
Representative Neerman yields.
Thank you. Yesterday was his first day of one of his community college courses, the last 2 that he has to take this summer to graduate as a junior, as an honor student at Clackamas Community College, saving the state school fund $15,000 because he's an IEP kid and he's double weighted. And he doesn't have to go back to his senior year, and he doesn't have a dime in debt. Mr. Speaker, there are other ways to educate children, and none of those bills were heard. None of those bills that save the system money were heard. None of those bills